Nakutarshana Bibyati Swarga Pavarga Nadakeshu Apituryartha Darshina Chana anywhere Bibyati are afraid Swarga in the higher planetary systems Apavarga in liberation Narakeshu and in hell Api even Tulya equal Artha value Darshina who see. Translation, devotees solely engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan never fear any condition of life. For them, the heavenly planets, liberation, and the hellish planets are all the same, for such devotees are interested only in the service of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Parvati might naturally have inquired how devotees become so exalted. Therefore, this verse explains that they are Narayana Para, simply dependent on Narayan. They do not mind reverses in life because, in the service of Narayan, they have learned to tolerate whatever hardships there may be. They do not care whether they are in heaven or in hell. They simply engage in the service of the Lord. This is their excellence. Anakulyena Krishnanushilanam. They are liberally engaged in the service of the Lord, and therefore they are excellent. By using the word Britya Brityanam, Lord Shiva pointed out that although Chitraketu provided one example of tolerance and excellence, all the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord as eternal servants are glorious. They have no eagerness to be happy by being placed in the heavenly planets, becoming liberated, or becoming one with Brahman, the supreme effulgence. These benefits do not appeal to their minds. They are simply interested in giving direct service to the Lord. I first offer my respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to all the previous acharyas, and to the assembled devotees. Vancha kalpatarubhascha kripa sindhave evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. And thank you, Bhakti Marg Swami, for coming back. Somehow we dragged along for the last couple of days. This is the quintessential verse defining the way that Vaishnavas are able to navigate the material world. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna advocating for us attaining equanimity and balance. For instance, he mentions Yukta Hara Viharasya, Yukta Cheshtasya Karmasu, Yukta Swapnavabodhasya Yogo Bhavati Dukkha. Yukta means a kind of balance in the way that we eat. He says, don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Don't recreate too much, don't recreate too little. And he says that we should not be disturbed by external events. Matra sparshas tu konteya shitoshna sukha dukkata agama paino nityas tams titikshashva bharata. Devotee tolerates when there are changes in the environment, either our internal environment or the external environment has its changes, and the devotee is titikshava, tolerant when these things are occurring, when the changes are occurring. We find that in this verse, there's much that surrounds it that's important. It's in the chapter Mother Parvati curses Chitraketu. So a few words about Chitraketu, in that he was a king, and the acharyas who comment, our acharyas who comment on Srimad Bhagavatam, mentioned that kings are given frequently as exemplars of various principles because at the time, king was considered to have everything needed for happiness in life. And nowadays, everyone lives like a king, especially on Roxborough Avenue. They have indoor plumbing and they have air conditioning and everything. A king, actually kings back then would have marveled at what people have anywhere in a modern society. Nonetheless, people had an idealistic thought that kings must be happy because they have everything. Therefore, we find examples throughout the Bhagavatam of kings. It was a king-dominated society at the time, in any case. Chitraketu was a king who had everything except for a son. And he wanted a son because that's one of the prime desires of a king, is the idea of passing on his lineage. At that time, because of the law of primogeniture, he needed a son to take over the kingship. But he couldn't get a son or a daughter or any offspring whatsoever due to circumstances. Therefore, he was bothered, even though he had ample material facility for emolument of his senses. This is an important principle which is mentioned both in the Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam and in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam Ataiva Shanta Bhukti Mukti Siddhikami Sakali Ashanta. A simple algebraic formula. And that is that Krishna Bhaktas are nishkam. Kam means material desire. And nishkam means they have no material desires. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam, Ataiva, Shanta. Shanta means they're peaceful. But there's a host of others who are not peaceful. Who are they? Bhukti. Bhukti means I want to satisfy my senses. Mukti means I would like to be freed from the cycle of birth and death and have nothing more to do with the variety of the material world. Get me out of here. Siddhi. Siddhi means somebody has figured out the laws of nature and how to manipulate them, which is described by Krishna in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the ways in which yogis are able to focus their minds on the prime elements of the material world, or a prime element, and therefore take on this particular quality of that element. That's how yogis legitimately levitate. They meditate on air and therefore become light and are able to rise above the ground. This is more or less a circus or a carnival sideshow because it's just an interaction with the material nature. So Chitraketu, although a king, had a material desire. He was a bhukti. He wanted something. He wanted his name to be carried on. He wanted a son and to train the son, hopefully to look just like him and to show off that here's the prince. And even he felt, as many do, I can die happy passing on my wealth to the son and carry on my name in this world. He did get a son by the benediction of Angira, Muni, Angira Rishi, came through. Chitraketu, expressed his material desire and said, "Can you help me?" And Angira gave him an honest answer. He said, "Yes and no." He said, "I can help you, but it's not going to be what you think, because the offspring that you'll produce, we could call that offspring Harsha Shoka. Harsha means joy, and Shoka means lamentation. So conceivably, you could call him Harsha Shoka, this little offspring child, because he'll cause you happiness, but then great lamentation." Chitraketu then rounded that down and thought, well, of course, everyone has a little bit of trouble when they have offspring, so on with the show. When he got offspring by the mystical power and benediction of Angira Rishi, as it turned out, he had many wives. Thousands, in fact. And the wife who had given birth to the child became the object of Chitraketu's affection and attention. The other ones, feeling neglected, conspired and poisoned the infant, upon which everyone in the palace who noticed that the child was dead, its eyes rolled up in its head, and first the nursemaids and then others who were assisting in the king's affairs began to wail. It was bad news for everybody. And then when the king came to see what had happened, he couldn't maintain consciousness. He saw his object of affection, the little child, and he collapsed. And then he came back to consciousness and then collapsed again. Can you imagine how much pain there is in the material attachment, or he had, because of his attachment to the little child, and what it feels like to black out because you can't even face the situation. The brain turns off. Bhagavatam shows us all the aspects of the material world, unabashedly. It takes us through the full spectrum. That's why in the Gita, Krishna talks about Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha. There's raga, irrational attachment to temporary matter, bhaya, which is fear of one's personal existence, and krodha, which means intellectual disgust, because there's so many incomplete ideas about what the purpose of life is or what the world is in general, that one becomes angry and just says there is no answer, and anybody who says there is a liar and a charlatan. And the Bhagavatam takes us through a journey to show us the material world in its extremes. So this is an extreme, isn't it? Say yes. And so in that state, Angira and Narada came back to Chitraketu's abode, and they noted what might be called a teachable moment. That sometimes when there are extreme circumstances in our life, it changes our perspective and we're open for some lesson. And to impart that lesson, Narada and Angira, by their mystic potency, again, were able to call the soul of that child back into the body and then interview him. The interview went something like this. Little Jiva, why did you leave? Because your parents are in great anxiety now. And he replies, well, I've had so many bodies, and by the way, I don't recognize these parents because I've had so many. The perspective begins to widen then of Chitraketu, and truncating the story, he takes shelter of spiritual process. Under Sankarsana, begins to chant a mantra. And because of his sincere intensity, he achieves perfection. So the Bhagavatam shows us this progression, how to take shelter and how to attain perfection. And in his perfected or semi-perfected state, that is, he hasn't gone back to Godhead, but he's completely liberated and he becomes a pure devotee. But he has some connection with this world because he begins traveling in an airplane with beautiful damsels who are singing. They fly over the place. You can't make this up. I mean, this is Bhagavatam. He flies over where Shiva and Parvati are consorting, and there are other sages there. Parvati is apparently sitting on his lap, and Chitraketu laughs out loud. And of course, Shiva and Parvati hear his response to seeing them. And of course, there's no fault in Shiva or Parvati. And really, there was no major fault in Chitraketu either, but Parvati took offense and she uttered the curse that Chitraketu should become a monstrous demon. And he does after this. He becomes Vritrasura, who's mentioned in the Rig Veda, the first of books known anywhere in the world. And he was known as a great demon in the Rig Veda. Bhagavatam turns that conception on its head, and we'll talk about that in a second. So when he hears the curse, he accepts it and he says, whatever there may be, I accept it. And this verse is Lord Shiva speaking to Parvati, noting that pure Vaishnavas are tulya. They're equal in whatever circumstances there are in life. And so this is a principle of the Bhagavatam. And there are a few words that are really important in this verse that we can take away, something practical. And I had written down in mnemonic to remember a few points. And you can remember the letters CIS as circumstances invite service. What is it? Yeah. So first we have Narayana Para Sarve. So para, it means it indicates Krishna. No one can compare to Krishna. And para is the priority of devotees. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Param Sada Pashanti Suryaho. That means their main objective in life is Narayan or Krishna. So although they may be walking in this world, they're focused on the ultimate goal of life. And they're looking at Godhead. And therefore, para means that their ultimate vision is that life's purpose is to attain Krishna. No other purpose. Everything is subservient to that goal. And Narayana Paraksarve Nakutaschana Bhipiti, which means there are no under all circumstances, the devotee is fearless. Nakutaschana Bhipiti. Bhipiti means bhayam or fear. So the devotee is never fearful. Why? Because his ultimate goal is Narayan. And therefore, Narayana Paraksarve Nakutaschana Bhipiti Swarga Pavargat Narakeshu Api Tulyarta Darshina. Darshina means to see. He sees everything equally as an equal opportunity to serve Krishna. And therefore, whenever a circumstance unfolds, favorable and unfavorable, in the life of the devotee, he or she accepts it as an opportunity to serve Krishna. And this is parallel with the verse from 10:14:8 from the Bhagavatam, in which Brahma says, Tattenu kampam susamikshamano bhunjana evatma kritam vipakam tredvagvapur viradam namaste jiveta yo mukti pade sadaya bhak. That whatever happens to a devotee, whatever, anything, he or she takes it as Krishna's mercy to invoke more service, body, mind, and words. And when one's aligned with this vision, it takes every circumstance as opportunity to purify oneself, to serve Krishna, then Brahma says, this attitude entitles one, literally entitles one, as if one's an inheritor and one's entitled to the inheritance. What do you inherit? The kingdom of God. And so, as any self-respecting, self-help guru in the world will tell you, that it's not what happens to you, it's how you interpret what happens to you that matters, and how you react to it. And so devotees have the ultimate sense of what the purpose of life is, para, and therefore they see everything as Krishna's mercy, which means an opportunity to increase service. Easier said than done, and I've made a few preliminary remarks, and we can go more deeply within the verse. Therefore, I ask if you'll make some reflections on what you've heard so far, or ask questions to expand the conversation. Ma Bhagavata Prabhu.
Experience in the journey of Krishna consciousness when I was one of the minor actors of plays of Bhagavata Course. And sometimes it often happens that some main actor who is supposed to play a main part does not show up. And this happens maybe the day before the performance, the show. And then I've seen other directors just losing their minds and yelling at people and just completely losing control. But Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, when he learned that two of his actors in the Ramayana did not show up the day before and could not make it for the performance, after weeks of rehearsals, sat down on a chair and said, let us see what Krishna wants to do. Wants us to do here. And then they went on. So that was an example right here.
That's an example. And this idea of CIS, circumstance invite service, first thing is center yourself. And the centering is what Maharaj said, was what does Krishna want us to do here? That's para. Everything's based on what does Krishna want. The next one, I, is interpret. How are you going to interpret what just happened to you? And that's the key. Because if you interpret it as I'm a victim, then there's not much you can do. But if you see this is Krishna's arrangement, then third one is serve. Center, interpret, serve. Means then you're able to stay current with your ultimate purpose, with your artha. Narayana parak sarve nakutaschana bhibliti swarga pavarga narakeshu api tulyarta darshina. That means that the value system of the devotee is, whether it's naraka, hell, whether it's the heavenly planets, or somewhere in between, all those circumstances, the devotee is looking, where's the opportunity to serve? Thank you. Nice example. Yes. We ended with not answering your question last class, so
am I allowed to ask two questions today?
Yeah.
The first question is from today's class. Um, Maharaj Chitraketu, he had darshan of Sankarsham, and he was traveling in heavenly planets where he could see Shiva Parvati as well. Um, and then he gets cursed by Parvati, and then he falls down and becomes a demon. Um, when we say spiritually falling down, or when someone spiritually falls down, what does it actually mean? Like, he fell down, but he became an asura, a very aggressive demon, but his consciousness was fully clean. His devotion was unalloyed, and in those circumstances, he was serving as a devotee. So externally, it looked like that he fell down, but internally, he was serving a great purpose. So what does actual spiritual fall down mean?
Yeah, thank you for framing that so well. In fact, in the Rig Veda, as I mentioned earlier, Vritrasura is considered to be a ghastly demon. Bhagavatam turns everything on its head because the value of the Bhagavatam, we had Sarvai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktirat Hoksiji Ahaitukya Pratiyata Yatma Suprasidati. The gold standard is, whatever the circumstances, whatever the body, unalloyed devotional service means the impetus for serving Krishna with no expectation of some reward. And it's without impediment. It doesn't stop. And therefore, in the Bhagavatam, we find those circumstances that are governed by material considerations. For instance, you have in the Bhagavat the wives of the Brahmanas. Generally, in the context of the society at that time, it was considered the husband was the head of the family. And here, in this pastime of Krishna, the cowherd boys going to the Brahmanas to beg alms, they ignored them, even though they announced they were representatives of Krishna and Balaram. And then Krishna sent them to the wives, and the wives immediately responded and came to Krishna and Balaram in the forest, bringing them all kinds of offerings. And then we find in the next few verses that the husbands become subservient to the wives because of the wives' superior position in devotional service. Para, the ultimate value is, if you find pure devotional service, has nothing to do with the external trappings of the body. You find usually the father-son relationship, the father tells the son what the ultimate purpose of life is and so forth, but you find in the Govardhan Leela, which is the very next Leela in the Bhagavatam, that the men in the village are setting up for an Indra Yajna, and then Krishna comes along as a little boy and starts questioning everything they're doing, and then tells his father, you should forego the Indra Yajna and you should just worship Govardhan Hill. In that case, the son circumvents the father. And then you have Bali Maharaj. Bali Maharaj's guru, Shukracharya, told him, I know you made a promise, but you're going to need that later, so especially to give me dakshina. So don't give the donation you told you were going to give. And there you have the disciple circumventing the guru, because the guru didn't represent pure devotional service, whereas Bali did, and he became it's known as now a great acharya, because he held that principle. Para, the ultimate goal is to serve Krishna. So we find with Vritrasura, this example in the Bhagavatam, which is not there in the Rig Veda, but the underpinnings of the story is there in the Bhagavatam. We find out that Vritrasura is a greater devotee than Indra, because Indra is concerned in the battle when he's there to kill Vritrasura, and he becomes enamored of Vritrasura's great power, begins to worry about losing everything, and Vritrasura says, come on, fight. This is your duty. You're supposed to fight and for the Supreme. What's more, you find in the prayers of Vritrasura not only great enlightenment, where he's talking to Indra about how this battlefield is like a chessboard and we're just playing a game, but then he brings out this deep sentiment for Krishna, saying like a baby bird waiting for its mother. That's the way I am. I just want to come back to you. Or a wife waiting for her husband to come home after a long journey. He's expressing deep separation for Krishna, even though he's in the demon's body. So all the cases throughout the Bhagavatam, we find that the value of pure devotional service comes out, so that we can understand and then not misinterpret. As happened earlier in the 6th canto, the Yamadutas misinterpreted who Ajamil is, because he's the most sinful person we've ever seen. I mean, he's a textbook case. It's here in the textbooks. We took in Yamaduta 101. But the Vishnuduta said, no, you may have passed the primary course, but you haven't passed the Bhagavata course. Because the Bhagavata course is, he uttered the name of Narayan in complete helplessness. Therefore, you interpreted wrong. See, the Bhagavatam is showing us how to interpret the world, how to interpret who we see. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought that forth in the world. He said, anyone I hear says Hare Krishna, that person, in my mind, I consider that person as a devotee. That's Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam says, Aho Batashva Pachato Garyan. This is Devahuti. Yajiva Gre Vartate Nama Tubhyam Te Pusta Paste Juvus Arya. Brahmana Trunama Granante Ete. See, normally people in some religious process, then they close ranks and they say only these people are the arbiters of the process. Nobody else can do it. And this is a materialistic thought, because we find then that, what was the verse I just did? Aho Batashwa. Devahuti is saying, oh, this is the amazing thing about the holy name, is that even if somebody who's considered by materialistic society to be in the lowest rank, Aho Batashwa Pachato, who's the lowest they can think of is somebody, when they go home for Thanksgiving dinner, they cook dogs. That's like the worst thing you can say about somebody. Shropacha means that they got dog cooking on the stove. So even somebody like that, if they say if they're chanting the holy name, if they come from that kind of background and they're chanting Hare Krishna, they're qualified for performing Vedic sacrifice, because the holy name prevails. It defeats the modes of material nature. And when we interpret, we have to take that Bhagavat view into consideration. So the Yamadutas missed it. And they got educated, and so did everybody else in the world through the pastime of Ajamil. And so in Vritrasura, we're getting another education about how to interpret the world. And that is not only about what just happened. He said, you become a demon, and he goes, and Shiva's noting, he doesn't mind. Why didn't he mind? Because it's bringing him closer to Krishna. There's some opportunity there, he sees. And so that's the Bhagavatam teaching us through these extreme circumstances how we maintain our equilibrium based on what's most important, and that's pure devotional service. Wherever you see it, you have to worship it, because that's the main goal of life in all circumstances. Yes? Oh, you had 2 questions. Go ahead, because I cheated you yesterday.
Thank you. From yesterday's class, we were talking about Bharat Maharaj. So Bharat Maharaj, when he decided to move to a forest, it was his own decision. He wasn't guided by any guru. And so what was the source of that motivation? And then when he becomes
Wait
when
a
he
minute, one question at a time. Now you got 3 questions going. But his source of meditation, motivation was his father, Rishabhadeva. He's the son of Rishabhadeva. Rishabhadeva is the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead with 100 sons. And he trained them all. So Bharat Maharaj considered him his guru. And you know what he preached, right? Nayam deho deha bhajam niloke kashtan kamam arhate vidbhujamye. Tapo divyam bhutraka yena sattvam shudyat yasmad brahma saukyam tvanantam. There's a whole series of verses there. They're very intense. That's why I always thought it was funny. Surdas put together that little book, was the Nectar of Bhakti or something. The first page says, don't be a pig. And it gives the verses from Rishabhadeva. So he was inspired by his father. His guru is not mentioned there, except for his father. Go ahead.
And then when he becomes Jad Bharat, the way he was acting, the way he was pretending, he was neglecting all the social obligations or responsibilities and expectations. And what we read in Bhagavatam, he was already in that transcendental kind of position. But in this material world, if somebody is acting in this way carelessly, is it because of transcendence or because of irresponsibility or being irresponsible?
That's why we talked on one of the first days about what are the verifiable signs of advancement in a devotee. Very difficult to tell from external symptoms. You have to see the verifiable signs. Someone may come and roll on the floor and tears pour from their eyes, but they could be good at that. So, as I mentioned from the commentary, the verse Evamvrata Swapriyanama that by steadiness and by the sound vibration that comes from that person's mouth, what do they speak about, you can judge. And if they're steady in devotional service, you can't fake steadiness, so you can understand somebody's advancement. If I tell you last night, I went up on the roof here and I was dancing with Krishna, it proved me wrong. How will you prove me wrong? But if you notice, those are things, I'm seeing Krishna all the time. How would you know? How would anybody know? So those are not verifiable symptoms. Therefore, the Shastra gives us verifiable symptoms where we can understand if somebody's advanced or not. And one of them is steadiness in devotional service. Somebody may be able to maintain. We had a new bhakta in Seattle. I just happened to be distributing books there, and he was the ideal bhakta of all bhaktas who ever lived on this planet. Perfect tilak. Who knew how he was able to put on his dhoti with such perfection, and the model citizen, until one day, 6 months in, we heard some ruckus downstairs, and during the Sunday program he took off all his clothes and ran down the street knocking on doors, everyone chasing after him, and then he was taken away. We saw that he had some mental problem. And during the beginning of his sojourn, he was able to show himself as somebody who looked like very high-class devotee. So over time, we see steadiness. When we see steadiness, we can understand there's some advancement. And also, how does a person speak? That's mentioned when Arjuna asked Krishna, what's the sign of a person who's advanced in devotional service? What's their speech? And if a person speculates or is interested in talking about politics and so forth, if it's no relationship to Krishna, then we can understand their mind is somewhere else. But if someone connects everything to Krishna and speaks for the benefit of others and so forth, then these are ways of interpreting who's advanced. Did you finish your...
Yes.
That's everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for this wonderful class. I just wanted to ask further clarity. You also already spoke about this, but the verse mentions that devotees are equipoised and they see everything as an opportunity to engage in pure devotional service unto the Lord. So how do we see the Lord's hand in every circumstance and be tolerant to difficulties, especially when one may still have material conditioning, bodily attachment, so they do feel the pain and suffering? This can also be due to their past life impressions, which make them vulnerable to experience the trauma. So how do we move past this feeling and willfully accept the circumstances such as Chitraketu? Thank you.
It's important to recognize that all devotees have two aspects to their lives. First, in general category, there's the ultimate goal, paramarthika, and then there's the part of their life in which they have to attend to the body and their normal duties in life based on the body. And I'm answering the question of how we might tend to ourselves or to others in cases when there are extreme changes, reversals, and so forth. We have to have a good bedside manner and not just tell people that. Well, I'll give you a story. There was a devotee, Mahamuni Prabhu. He was a brahmachari, senior brahmachari. He was in an ashram in St. Louis, and he had a high fever and flu. He was sleeping on the floor, as all brahmacharis usually do. And there was a new bhakta there who had understood theoretically the philosophy. And he heard Mahamuni, who was in some pain, say, groan. He groaned. It was audible. And the new bhakta, being helpful, turned to Mahamuni in his sleeping bag and he said, "Prabhu, you're not your body." And Mahamuni, with all his strength, was able to peek his head out of the sleeping bag, get up on one elbow, and look over to the new bhakta and said, "Prabhu, you're not my body either." Which I thought was a pretty witty answer, but it also sort of philosophically describes how we have to have compassion. Krishna says in 6th chapter of Gita, Atma pam yena sarvatya sarvam Atma pam yena sarvatra samam pashiti Arjuna sukham va yarivadukam sa yogi paramo mataha. Krishna says the parama yogi is one who has compassion. That means sukham va yarivadukam. He understands that there's happiness and distress based on the material world, and it is piercing. It's traumatic for the soul. Therefore, he doesn't just discount that and say that, well, Prabhu, you're not your body. So there's a bedside manner there where the devotee accommodates that part and also then administers the medicine. Like doctors, hey, if a doctor just comes in, have you ever had a nurse, like, I don't know, the quintessential nurse, I'm not even going to mention her name, from antiquity, but the nurse comes in and is just rude, nasty, or treats you impersonally. My mother, when she was elderly, she didn't have anything specifically, but her husband, my father, had passed away. They had been married for 70 years. And she had to go in the hospital for something. It wasn't major, but she was treated with such indignity there that she came home and said, "Never take me to the hospital again," because she was so mistreated, handled impersonally. And so we have to be careful to minister to both parts, to appreciate the person. After all, look at Krishna. After Kurukshetra, you'll notice in the first canto, who's reading the first canto? You are. You're reading the first canto right now. Yeah, in the first canto, there's a scene where Krishna's there doing the last rites for all those who have passed, and the relatives are there. And with great compassion, Krishna goes there, and he's consoling everybody. And these are all members of his dynasty, and pure devotees are there, but they're disconsolate. So he ministers to that part of them. And then, of course, there's the talks of self-realization and understanding. So I'm saying there has to be a balanced approach in presenting to somebody who's traumatized by the material world. They'll need a hug. And you know, I got one when my father passed away. I was in Vrindavan. I was in that second floor flat in the MPT, and Nirkula wasn't there. She was home in California, and she called me. It was like 2 a.m. or something. And I didn't sleep the rest of the morning. But when I walked downstairs, Samapriya and Dhruva were staying in the apartment downstairs, and Samapriya, Jewish mother, just happened to open the door when I was walking down and goes, "What happened? What's wrong?" Because she could just see I was pale. And then she goes, "Oh," and she gives me a hug. Sort of unconventional, but she knew I needed a hug. And then there was a brahmachari walking by. He was Italian, and he came over, "What's the matter?" You know, and he said, and he came over and gave me a hug. And I all of a sudden started to feel a little bit better just because of the compassion of the devotees. Then the medicine can start to go in, and there's ways in which to overcome the trauma and the angst that we feel. So a combined approach is helpful. And what was the other part of the question?
How to move past this feeling.
How
How
do
to
you
move past this feeling and come to that level where Chitraketu willfully accepted everything. Where, for instance, Mother Parvati cursed him, and he willfully accepted that curse. So how do we also accept some circumstances and not be lamenting and moving away from Krishna?
First of all, by understanding our center. Tatenu kampam susumikshimano. We have this idea of this must be Krishna's arrangement. That's what Parikshit Maharaj says. He got cursed. Everybody gets cursed in the Bhagavatam. Everybody. Parikshit Maharaj got cursed. And what did he say? He said, "Thank you, Krishna. I needed this. I wouldn't have come out of this on my own. And therefore, you're so merciful, you pulled me out." Did you just read that part? Yeah. So, you know, they say, shoot first, ask questions later. Assume that it's Krishna's arrangement first, and then ask questions afterwards of, how is it Krishna's arrangement? What's the lesson in this? What's he trying to teach me? Which way is he pushing me? And I saw Swami Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj had a post, I think it was last year or something. You know, he does those little quotes. He said, everybody in the world's going to die, and everybody knows it. Just paraphrasing what it said. But when somebody dies, everyone's surprised. And then he wrote at the bottom, what's the lesson? So unless we keep a very wide context that we're passing through, this too shall pass. Everything's moving. We're not even this body. Then when something happens, to the degree that we're attached to the circumstance that I'm going to hold on to that degree we suffer. And those who have already resigned themselves, like Didichi, one of our great heroes. I mean, Jadbara and Didichi are great heroes in the Bhagavatam for me. I love those stories. Didichi was such a great Muni. They needed, I guess this is 8th canto, they needed to fight the demons, they needed some weapon. He had been chanting the Narayana Kavacha, therefore his bones had some special power. So Vishnu tells him, if you want to create a weapon to defeat your enemies, you have to get the bones of Didichi. It's like, how are we going to do that? Just ask him. He said he'll probably, decline it first just so he can hear what you have to say, but he'll give them to you, because just tell him it's for Vishnu. So they go to Didichi and they said, we need a little donation. Like, yeah, what would you like? Said, your bones? Tadichi said, come on, it's really hard to give up the body, isn't it? And they say, but it's for Vishnu, it's for Vishnu, you know. He goes, all right, you can have them. And he just hands them over. And the author notes that he already gave him up long ago. He didn't care. He's just waiting for the opportunity to hand him over. Because when the opportunity to hand it over to Vishnu comes, that's the spirit of this verse, Narayana Para. It's like everything for Narayan, and if you get a good opportunity, then do it. You're ready. It's true in accounting. If you give all your stuff away, they can't tax you. There's something called a charitable remainder trust. There are all kinds of implements in accounting where you can reduce your taxes. Charitable remainder trust means you bequeath all of major portion of your assets to a charity, and then you get an annuity for some time, but after that's finished, everything just goes to the charity. Reduces your taxes. If you don't have anything, that's what entrepreneurs do, CEOs. They don't pay taxes because they just say, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the company. I'm just using it. Right? CEOs? Anyone out there? You just say, there's nothing to tax. It's all taxed by the government. There's no personal thing for me. I'm just using that stuff. So devotees are like that too. I don't have anything. This body not mine. I don't have any. It's all Krishna's. Narayana Parak Sarve. It all belongs to Narayan. And therefore, there's no karma. Karma is a kind of tax because you're trying to use the things for yourself, so you got to pay it back. Right? Devarshi bhutatna nrinam pitrinam nakinkaro nayam ranicha rajan sarvatmaraya sharanam sharanyam gatom bhunkundam pariyakhritikartam. This is Bhagavatam. It says, everybody's a debtor when they come into this world. To the devas, the rishis, to your family, to animals who took care of you, gave you milk, everything. And you have to pay them back. That's why when you're born, your parents have a little fund for you maybe so you can go to college. Because they're like, chop, chop. You got to get all A's so you can go to college, and after college, get an internship, and you got to start working because you got to pay me back, and you got to pay your debt back to everybody. But devotees don't owe anything because they already gave it all to Krishna. There's nothing left. Taxpayer comes and it's like, sorry, there's nothing. And as far as death goes, what's to die? Die just means giving all your stuff back. And it was like, now? I was going to use that for a while. But they already bequeathed it to Krishna. It's like you sign a little thing over. Ishavasya sarvam. It all belongs to God. I don't have any of it. And if you live like that, Krishna says in the Gita, Brahmanyadaya karmani sangham tyakva karotya. You already gave it away. Then you're in the world, but you never get touched by it. Nobody can come and ask you for some tax because you already paid it. Paid your spiritual tax. Prabhu, we'll end with you with the last question. Are you're obviously studying Prabhupada's books.
Sorry?
You ask good questions. You're obviously studying the books. You're reading Bhagavatam, right?
Yes.
I can tell.
Dadiji's wands were used, I guess, in the 6th canto to kill Vritasur.
That's right. Is that right? No.
Vritasur?
Yeah, that's how he got it. Okay, 6th canto, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
That was all. Thank you.
Okay. Dear okay. Since that was a semi-question, we'll end with yours.
We have a group chat with some parents of kids who are similar age. So Sadhanandi Mataji asks for a comment on the statement, despite praying intensely for something, things don't happen as expected, or it was prayed for, and when an adverse situation comes, it takes a long time to center oneself or digest what's happening or accept the situation. So she's inviting some comment on that.
Yeah, if you have a wider vision and you can develop that, then the idea of how long something takes is irrelevant because you're Narayana Para. You know it's Krishna's arrangement ahead of time. Therefore, you can wait to see how it's going to play out, how it's Krishna's arrangement, not if it actually is Krishna's arrangement. There's a difference between those things. And these things can be practiced by learning to depend on Krishna. How? By chanting Hare Krishna. If you take shelter of the holy name in all circumstances, Bhagavatam says, Apana samshrutim goran yannama vibhishogranan tatasadyo vimucheta yad vipeti swayam bayam. That fear will go away immediately if you just say, Krishna! Krishna! That's what it says to do. It says call out Krishna's name because he's non-different from his name and he's feared by fear personified. So our process, how to process things, it's not a mental exercise. It's natural that we call out, Krishna, I'm helpless, please save me. And he reciprocates. He says in the Gita, I'll come and I'll pull you out. So in the very acceptance that Krishna is going to save me one way or another, there's some solace immediately. Just a last thing I wanted to mention. When Prabhupada was building the Juhu project, there was a lot of problems because buying land in India is one of the most difficult things you could possibly do. Even after you've bought it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to keep it. And so they got the land, and the story's well known that the person who sold it to him then tried to stall the permit process so they wouldn't be actually able to build what he wanted to on the property, rendering it for most people useless who might have a profit motive. But you might note in Giriraj Swami's book about this episode that when Prabhupada found out that the permit was being withheld, he said, and so nothing could be built, and they already bought the property. So Prabhupada said, okay, we'll turn it into a bus stop, and we'll have buses going around Mumbai all day long distributing books, and they'll come back and they'll stop here at the bus stop. So when I was just thinking of that in terms of the way devotees think, whatever the circumstance, okay, you just paid all the money, now you've been cheated, what do you do now? Okay, how to engage in Krishna's service? It's a bus stop, it's no longer a luxury hotel. And so devotees are just thinking, they're malleable, they think, okay, how can it now be used in Krishna's service? And that's what insulates us from that idea that now we've lost everything. You never lose anything because everything can be used in Krishna's service. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Gauranitai, Shri Shri Radha Kir Chor Gopinath, Jai Jagannath Baladev Subhadra, if you so desire, please let us bequeath all of those things we perceive to be ours and sign them over to Krishna in his service so that we may become Narayana Para. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpataruscha kripa sindhabe evacha patitanam pavnibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha ananta koti vaishnavini ki jai.